You think wealth starts with a wire transfer, a new job, a sudden check in the mail. But no, God doesn't work like a lottery machine. He works like a locksmith. And the first lock is not your wallet. It's your mind. That's the part nobody tells you. Everyone wants the overflow, but they're still carrying a scarcity script in their subconscious. You want God to drop wealth in your lap, but your internal language still whispers, I'm not worthy. I'm not ready. It's too late for me. And what does God say? I've already opened the heavens, but your door is still bolted shut. Wealth isn't just money. That's the symptom, the fruit. The real wealth is internal, a posture, a frequency, a clarity of identity. And most people will die broke not because God never gave them access, but because they never opened the portal inside themselves. You can't attract what your internal environment is allergic to. And that's what we're talking about here, psychological immunity to prosperity. You want abundance, but you're still addicted to lack. You crave more, but you're still loyal to struggle. You rehearse prayers for overflow, but your nervous system is wired for survival. So when God says 48 hours to wealth open immediately, He's not warning you about the clock. He's confronting your conditioning. Let me break it down. Every time you reject an opportunity because it feels too big, every time you sabotage a connection because you fear being seen, every time you shrink your voice in rooms where you shrunken view, not protecting yourself, you're blocking divine flow. You've become your own dam, and God isn't mad, He's just waiting for you to override the poverty programming your trauma installed, waiting for you to override that ancient voice that said you had to earn love, prove your value, beg for blessings. What you have to understand is this: wealth responds to identity, and identity is not who you pretend to be. When you post your goals online, it's who you are when you're alone, the truth you embody in silence, the internal permission you give yourself when no one's watching. God doesn't release abundance to the version of you you're faking. He releases it to the one He designed. And until you align with that blueprint mentally, spiritually, emotionally, nothing sticks. That's why some people can receive money and still feel empty, because the shell was full, but the soul was hollow. They had access to the treasure, but none of the wisdom to hold it. And look, this isn't about guilt. It's about awakening. The truth is, many of you are already sitting in the middle of wealth, but you don't recognize it. Why? Because you've only been trained to see wealth as currency, not as clarity, not as connection, not as calling. But what if I told you your next million isn't in a paycheck, it's in a decision? What if the 48-hour window isn't about money falling into your lap, but about a portal opening in your mind, inviting you to shift? When God gives a window like this, He's not teasing you with fantasy. He's challenging you to rise, to open the mental and emotional locks that have kept you bound to just enough, to almost, to not yet. The vault isn't in heaven. The vault is you. Here's the catch though, portals don't stay open forever. There's urgency in divine timing. And the enemy of divine timing isn't the devil, it's indecision. You sit around wondering, what if I'm not ready? And the door you prayed for shuts while you're still calculating your worthiness. Let me be clear, the moment God declares a window open, you're already worthy. The question is, will your mind open before it closes? So before you ask for the wealth, ask yourself, am I mentally available for it? Not just excited by the idea of it, but ready to house it, steward it in, and expand it. Because God doesn't just bless what you touch, He blesses what you're prepared to hold. Open immediately, not tomorrow, not next year, now. Because the most dangerous delay is the one you disguise as patience. And the most powerful wealth move you'll ever make is the moment you finally you decide to become the version of you God already sent the blessing for. You ever wonder why some people seem to catch the wave of opportunity right on time, while others drown in delay? Why one person's life flips overnight, while another stays stuck on repeat, even though they're both praying to the same God? It's not favoritism. It's not luck. It's alignment. Alignment is what triggers acceleration. You think speed comes from hustle. You think the 48-hour window is about trying harder, pushing faster, doing more. But that's not how divine timing works. With God, it's not about volume, it's about vibration. What's the frequency of your life? Does your current pattern match what you're asking for? Because if it doesn't, you're not slowing the process, you're rejecting it without realizing it. See, most people are living out of rhythm with the very thing they're praying for. They say they want wealth, but their decisions reflect fear. They talk about elevation, but their routines are grounded in stagnation. They want miracles, but still entertain mindsets that are allergic to movement. And then they wonder why nothing's showing up. But it's simple. You cannot receive what you are not aligned to recognize. God doesn't accelerate confusion. He doesn't pour into chaos. He's not going to drop treasure into a heart that's still conflicted about whether it wants to be great or just liked. You can't be double-minded and expect double portion blessings. That's not faith, that's self-deception. You want God to move in 48 hours, but you're still making 48 excuses. That's the disconnect. You think the delay is in heaven, but the delay is in your habits, your atmosphere, your agreement with mediocrity. And until your choices come into harmony with your calling, they'll be praying for breakthroughs in places God has already left. Let me be blunt. God's clock doesn't start when you whine. It starts when you align. When you shift your behavior to match your belief. When your actions declare what your mouth's been mumbling for years. That's when acceleration hits. Not because God finally noticed you, but because you finally matched the assignment He already prepared. There's a psychological principle called cognitive dissonance. It's the tension between what you say you want and how you actually live. And a lot of people are praying in one direction while walking in another. You want abundance, but you still operate out of scarcity. You want freedom, but your schedule is chained to things that drain you. You want the door to open, but you're camped outside the wrong building. You want acceleration. Then ask yourself one brutal question. What part of me is out of alignment with the thing I'm asking for? That's where the friction lies. That's the dissonance. And as long as you protect your misalignment, you'll delay your own miracles. Let's be clear, alignment isn't about perfection. It's about direction. It's about getting radically honest with yourself and saying, if I keep living like this, thinking like this, choosing like this, does it match the future I'm claiming God is sending me in 48 hours? If the answer is no, then it's time to pivot. Not slowly. Not eventually. Immediately. Because the clock is ticking. Not on God's end, but on yours. And don't be fooled, alignment isn't always glamorous. Sometimes it looks like walking away from everything familiar. Sometimes it means deleting the contact, quitting the job, changing the circle. Not because you're better than anyone, but because you're becoming someone new. And the new version of you can't survive in the old ecosystem. This is where most people get stuck. They want the blessing, but they don't want the breaking. They want the future, but they don't want to forfeit the comfort of now. But God doesn't accelerate your comfort. He accelerates your clarity. And when you finally decide to move like the door is already open, that's when the door actually opens. Because God doesn't respond to begging. He responds to boldness. And boldness only lives where alignment breathes. It's in the way you show up, the way you speak, the way you treat what you're building like it's already funded. That's alignment. That's divine agreement. That's how heaven recognizes you. So here's the bottom line. Until your actions match your anointing, your prayers will stay pending. But the moment you align, really align, you won't have to chase anything. What's yours will rush toward you like it's been waiting on you this whole time. Because it has. You keep asking for wealth, for a breakthrough, for that divine shift, but here's the uncomfortable truth. You've been ignoring the very signs that are trying to lead you there. Everyone wants a burning bush, but God rarely shouts. He whispers. And those whispers don't come dressed in miracles. They come disguised as moments, tiny nudges, a gut feeling, a strange coincidence, a random person crossing your path. But most people are too busy, too distracted, too locked into their own mental noise to notice what's actually happening. You're not waiting on a miracle. The miracle is waiting on your awareness. You're praying for a sign, but you missed it 3 times this week because it didn't arrive the way you expected. You thought it would be fireworks. It was a sentence someone spoke that struck your spirit, but you brushed it off. You thought it would be a deposit. It was a door, but it didn't look fancy enough, so you walked past it. That's how people miss divine moments, not because they weren't there, but because they were disguised in ordinary wrapping. Let's get philosophical for a second. There's a concept in psychology called inattentional blindness. It's when you fail to perceive something in plain sight because your attention is elsewhere. The truth is, most of us are spiritually blind because we've been trained to look for wealth in narrow categories. You think wealth only looks like money when it often starts as insight. You expect your 48-hour miracle to be material when it might actually be directional, a redirection, a reawakening, a reset. God doesn't always move in the dramatic. He often moves in the subtle. But subtle doesn't mean insignificant. It means strategic, like chess. Every move looks small until you realize it's setting up the checkmate. You're watching your life unfold and wondering why nothing's shifted, but the board's been shifting all around you. And if you'd pause long enough, breathe long enough, you'd realize the pattern is forming. The message is showing. The guidance is happening, but you've got to train your mind to see it. Here's the problem: you've been conditioned to expect everything to come with fanfare. So when something profound shows up in a quiet package, you overlook it. But God doesn't need noise to change your life. He needs receptivity, your ability to recognize the sacred in the subtle. That stranger who spoke life into you, that wasn't random. That idea that woke you up at 3:me. That wasn't imagination. That situation you barely survived, that wasn't luck. That was alignment pulling you forward, even when your conscious mind didn't fully understand what was happening. And that's where faith matures. Not when you're dancing after the blessing lands, but when you respond in real time to something you can't fully explain yet. When you move based on the hint, the pattern, the stirring. That's what separates those who tap into accelerated blessings from those who sit around wondering why God seems silent. He's not silent. You're just not tuned in. So let me ask you this: how many signs have you ignored this week? How many prompts did you explain away? How many inner nudges did you bury beneath logic, fear, or routine? Because sometimes God doesn't shout go, He whispers now. And if you're not listening, the window doesn't wait. In this 48-hour window, God isn't just pouring out wealth. He's pouring out instructions, strategies, tiny revelations that shift everything. But you can't follow instructions you didn't catch. And you won't catch them if you're still obsessed with the old way you thought your blessing would arrive. You have to become a detective of divine detail. Every moment, every conversation, every detour an opportunity to decode something higher. Because when you start to treat life like it's speaking to you, it will. Patterns will emerge. Truths will land. And suddenly what once felt random starts to feel orchestrated. That's not magic, that's alignment. That's awareness, that's presence. And wealth, real wealth, it lives in presence. Because the present moment is the only place you'll ever be able to act on divine instruction. If your mind is always stuck in past pain or future fantasy, you'll miss the one place where transformation actually happens, right here. So hear this clearly: your next breakthrough won't scream for your attention. It will whisper. And the ones who hear it, they're not the luckiest. They're the most aware. Because the wealth God is pouring out in this window isn't just for those who ask. It's for those who notice. Let's talk about fear, the kind of fear that wears a suit and tie, smiles politely, and whispers lies so convincingly you start calling it wisdom. It doesn't shout, it doesn't storm in, it just quietly convinces you to wait, to think twice, to hesitate. That's the fear that kills more wealth than poverty ever could. Because poverty might be a circumstance, but fear is a mindset, and mindsets outlast circumstances. You can escape a bad situation. But if fear is your default lens, you'll recreate that bad situation everywhere you go, even when the opportunity is real. You get a 48-hour window, a divine green light. God says, go now, and you start calculating, measuring the risk, asking 10 people what they think. You pray again, asking for confirmation when the instructions were already clear. That's not discernment. That's disguised disobedience. You're not stuck because you don't know what to do. You're stuck because fear made you question what you already knew. People romanticize faith. They think it's all peace and praise music. But real faith often feels like terror, like your stomach flipping, like your logic screaming at you to stop. Because real faith demands that you move before you feel ready. It demands that you bet on a version of yourself you haven't fully met yet. And that's terrifying because fear hates, unforheats. But guess what? So does growth, so does wealth, so does destiny. Wealth doesn't live in your comfort zone. It's outside the border of what feels manageable. And that's why God doesn't give you the full map, He gives you the next step. Because even next a step. If He showed you the full journey, fear would talk you out of it before you even started. So He gives it to you in pieces, trusting that if you have the courage to act on this piece, the next one will show up when it's time. You want the door to open, but you're too afraid to knock, too afraid to hear no. But let me tell you something, fear of rejection is often just disguised fear of responsibility. You're not really afraid they'll say no, you're afraid they'll say yes, and then you'll actually have to show up, deliver, stretch, lead. That's a real fear. What if I get everything I prayed for and I still don't feel enough? But here's the truth. You will never feel fully ready for what you're called to carry. Not at first. The readiness comes after the risk. The confidence shows up after the leap. So you have two choices: wait until you feel safe or move while it still feels scary. One keeps you comfortable. The other makes you wealthy. There's a deep psychological principle at play here. The human brain is wired to protect us from perceived threats. It's designed to avoid uncertainty. So when you consider a bold move, starting that business, investing in yourself, walking away from something toxic, your brain fires off danger signals. But here's the twist. Your brain doesn't know the difference between growth and danger. It only knows unfamiliarity. And so what feels unsafe might actually be the safest path to your purpose. You're not in danger, you're in transition. But fear will lie to you and call the unfamiliar a threat when it's actually a door. Most people don't fail because they're incapable. They fail because they hesitated. The window opened, and instead of walking through, they started negotiating with their trauma, with their self-doubt, with their imposter syndrome. And while they debated, the moment moved on. God isn't punishing you with missed opportunities. He's proving to you that movement is what activates miracles. The universe isn't waiting for you to be fearless. It's waiting for you to act despite your fear. That's where the power is. That's when the shift happens. Not when you eliminate fear, but when you dethrone it. When you say you can ride in the car, but you don't get to drive anymore. Because fear will always have a voice. You just have to stop giving it a vote. So let me leave you with this. Your wealth isn't hiding behind mystery. It's hiding behind fear. And the moment you stop asking fear for permission to move, you'll discover that everything you need is already in motion. But it won't wait. The 48 hours have started. And fear doesn't get to steal what God already said is yours. Let's talk about decisions. Not the big dramatic ones that get applause, the quiet ones. The subtle ones. The ones you make in private when no one's watching. Because in the next 48 hours, the breakthrough that's been circling your life won't be activated by a miracle falling out of the sky. It'll be triggered by a decision. One choice. One internal shift. That's the irony. Everybody wants a supernatural outcome, but they avoid the human responsibility that unlocks it. You think wealth shows up with a bang. Often it starts with a decision that feels so small you almost miss its power. Saying no to that old pattern. Saying yes to that uncomfortable opportunity. Reaching out. Walking away. Starting over. It's never about what the decision looks like to other people. It's about what it breaks open inside of you. That's the tipping point. Let's go deeper. Psychologically, the mind craves certainty. It craves familiarity. It's constantly working to keep your identity stable. That's why change feels so violent sometimes, because every time you make a new decision, you're threatening the old version of yourself. The version that's been safe, predictable, in control. But that old self isn't compatible with the wealth you're praying for. It can't survive in the atmosphere you're being called into. So when you make a new decision, it's not just about results, it's about resurrection. You're burying one identity so another can rise. People underestimate the spiritual violence of a true decision. You can feel it in your chest, the weight of it, because it's not just about what you're choosing, it's about what you're choosing. Every real decision is a funeral, a burial of comfort or habit or narrative, and if you're not willing to bury the old, don't expect the new to rise. You say you want wealth. Are you willing to become someone new to hold it? Because here's the truth, God doesn't release wealth to people who refuse to evolve. The blessings you're asking for require you to think differently, feel differently, move differently. But that shift starts with a decision. And you're not going to feel ready. You're going to feel scared. You're going to feel resistance. But clarity doesn't come before the leap. It comes after. Action is what clarifies purpose. Motion reveals alignment. In these 48 hours, you're not just being asked to believe. You're being asked to decide, not just pray, commit. That's where power lies, in commitment. And most people never experience wealth not because they're lazy, but because they stay in mental limbo. Half in, half out. Entertaining new possibilities while still entertaining old habits. And life doesn't move for that energy. Heaven doesn't respond to indecision. It responds to clarity. It responds to finality, to the kind of inner yes that burns bridges behind you so there's nowhere to retreat to. Let me be clear, this moment is not waiting on external change. It's waiting on internal resolve. You've got to stop waiting for confirmation from people who never saw your vision. Stop collecting opinions to avoid responsibility. Stop asking for signs you already received last month. You know it needs to change. You just haven't decided to change it. But nothing divine moves until you do. Look at scripture, philosophy, psychology, it all echoes the same principle. Free will is the mechanism of transformation. That's why God gave it to you. Because your destiny isn't just a matter of design. It's a matter of decision. And the irony is, you're already making decisions every day that shape your wealth. The question is whether they're conscious. Because indecision is still a decision, it just usually serves your fear instead of your fear. So here's the challenge. In the next 48 hours, what are you going to decide? What internal contract are you going to sign with your next level? You don't need another prophecy. You need alignment. You don't need more time. You need courage. Because when the decision is real, the delay breaks. When your soul says yes, the path starts moving. Doors that were stuck start swinging open because your energy shifted. Your posture changed. Your yes wasn't passive anymore, it had power behind it. So if you're serious about wealth, don't just wish for it. Decide for it. Because the universe doesn't respond to desire, it responds to decision. And if you dare to make one bold decision in the next 48 hours, it might just shift everything you thought was stuck.